All set? Okay. Joseph Haydn is actually older than Mozart, so we could have started with him, but Mozart in some ways is easier to describe classical music with at this point. So, Haydn's a really interesting guy. Wonderful sense of humor. Just an example, he worked for the Prince of Esterhazy, which is near Vienna. It's outside the city. And many of the musicians that the Prince of Esterhazy hired for Haydn's orchestra came from Vienna. And so they worked at the court, which was probably a day's carriage ride from Vienna. And then they would go home on, I don't know, probably not weekends, I don't think it worked that way, but they went home whenever they were released for the summer or for whatever the holidays were. And there's this, the story goes that at one of these holidays, the prince had some things planned and wanted to keep the musicians longer than normal. And they were a little perturbed, but of course, I mean, they had good jobs. It's one of the better jobs around Vienna, actually. This guy paid well, and it was a good orchestra, and Haydn was the director, so it was really a good place to work. But they wanted to go home. And so Haydn wrote a piece, kind of as a joke. It's called the Farewell Symphony. That's just a nickname that was given to it later on. But what happens is that in the last movement of this piece, it starts out with everybody playing, I don't know, whatever, with smaller orchestras in those days than we have today. If you go to the Sheboygan Symphony, you'll see 60 or 70 people on stage. Those days it was 30 or so. And so everybody, yeah.
There's 5 minutes left on
Okay,
the battery.
yeah, well, I think we can do it in 5 minutes. We'll see. If anything happens to me, you guys just keep going. So he was, so he started this fourth movement of this symphony. There are 4 movements in a symphony. And it's about halfway through, one of the cellists, I forget which instrument leaves first, but stands up and walks off. And then about 8 measures later, another instrument stands up. It's all written into the score. And one by one, the instruments leave until there's only 2 violinists playing at the very end, and then one of those violinists gets up and walks off. And I forget exactly how he ends the thing. I think the first violinist maybe even stops in mid-phrase. I can't remember exactly the ending. But it was a joke, of course. And Esterhazy took it well, the prince took it well, but it gives you a sense of how Haydn thought. An interesting guy. When he died, Napoleon's army, the French army, which had conquered much of Europe, including Vienna, Napoleon was in Vienna at the time as an occupying army, and Napoleon had an honor guard set outside of Haydn's residence between the burial and the funeral or whatever it was. So that's an interesting little unimportant fact. Interesting but unimportant. So here we go. The piece we've picked out from Haydn is called the Farewell Symphony, the Surprise Symphony. Because of this movement, the second movement of the symphony is a slow movement, and it has a sudden loud chord, which is the surprise. But the reason I picked it out, or I think Camille picked it out, because it's theme and variation. And a theme and a variations can be another example of classical style, because what happens is it starts out with this melody, which you'll recognize, yum bum 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 bum, or not, bum 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 bum. That melody comes up again and again, right? And it could get boring, except that every time the melody returns, something changes. That's the variation. So the theme keeps coming back, but each time there's a variation. Now, to follow those variations, you can follow the listening guide. Carmine does a great job of this. He describes what each variation is like and where it happens, and you can follow along very easily. So we don't need to do that here. All I wanted to do is actually point out how the theme and variations is typically classical. Because what it is, if you think of the theme as the convention, because after the second time, it's the same, right? And the variation is the invention, because every single time it's different. And so, there's this old Greek saying you can't step into the same river twice, because, how many have heard that? Have you heard that phrase? You can't step into really? Yeah, you've heard it. The idea is that it's always a different river, right? because you go to the Pigeon River. Is this the Pigeon? No, that's the Sheboygan, right?
Sheboygan's that way.
Sheboygan's that, yeah, the Sheboygan River's over here. Pigeon River's in Howard's Grove. I don't know if the twain do not meet. Anyway, that's totally beside the point, and I don't have much time. So, in other words, the theme keeps returning. It's always there, but sometimes it's in major, sometimes it's in minor, sometimes at the very beginning it's just simply stated, and sometimes there's a little violin going on top of it, on top of the melody to give it some variation. In other words, you can't. You're stepping into the same river because it's the same theme, but you're not stepping into the same river because it's the different theme. And that's the same thing with nature. The world we look at is not the same world that was out there 10 years ago, and yet it is. The Sheboygan Woods is the same woods that was there 150 years ago when the German Fritz Reinecking and his party came from Germany and settled this place along this river that had no name yet, except from Native Americans. And yet, it's not, because every tree is different. You and I, are the same people we were 15 years ago, and yet we're not. Right? Every cell in our body has regenerated. We are totally different personalities, and not at the same time. We are different and we are the same. That balance, that harmony of difference and sameness, of constancy and change, of convention and invention, is the fundamental classical idea. So I'm just going to start it now, and when the tape runs out, it looks like we're running out of space, right? Is it space
The battery.
or battery?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're about to disappear into cyberspace out there, but so here goes.